All right. So you put together a deck, you got a meeting with someone, and now you're there, and you've got to figure out what are you actually going to do. And this is hopefully where the bulk of your time is actually going to be spent in the fundraising process. Maybe you spend a week or 2 weeks doing the prep work. If you spend more than that, you're in trouble. And then you start trying to get intros, and you're spending a week or two doing that, and then you get meetings, and you now have probably hundreds of meetings. Maybe if you're really lucky, you only have a few dozen, but the vast majority of people are going to say no, and you're going to do a terrible job at first. That's fine. You only needed a few people to say yes, but you've got to figure out how do you get that pitch to a place where people actually want to say yes. We've gone back and forth on this, but sometimes in pitches we won't actually do a straight walk through the deck. We'll often start with a story. And you want to figure out how can you tell a compelling story almost about your journey, because they're investing in you more than the exact piece of software you happen to have right now, because you're gonna pivot 5 times and you don't have any traction yet. And so really the question is, are you worth betting on? Are you someone that they believe in? And so as much as it's about showing the problem and the solution, ideally they're oh yeah, this is a perfect problem and you've got the perfect solution and I believe in that. It's also about lending credibility to you and building rapport. And so oftentimes what we do in the first half of the meetings, we'll talk people through well, we were doing research at Duke, we came from this kind of background, we were doing these things, name drop stuff, right? Talk about the types of interesting topics we were working on. And then we're man, but just in academia, nothing really gets translated to the real world. And so we started noticing this and we started working on these problems on the side. And we'll build up this narrative that's really kind of irrelevant to whether or not our product is going to succeed in theory. But it's not irrelevant to whether we're the kinds of people who are going to make it work. Because so much of a startup is about execution. It's not about just the idea. And so in theory, you should just believe in whether or not this product and the solution are the answer. But the real thing is they want to know, are you the kind of person who's going to take that into fruition? And that can happen. It's almost an emotional thing. Really when you're pitching, they get sold by being excited and by being emotionally invested in your story. And then they're looking for excuses to justify this to themselves and other people, so that when you fail, they can say, oh, well, but, they went to Duke, so I believe in this. Oh, they had, raised, this round before that. Or, oh, well, they had Mark Cuban in there, so, what could I have done better than Mark Cuban, right? But that's not actually what gets them to want to invest. What gets them to want to invest is believing in you, believing in the story, believing in why you're doing this. And the rest is kind of details to them and their team. The most important thing to understand here is that this does not happen out of the gate. Your first pitches are going to be terrible. Right. And so what happens is you come in and you've got a deck that you've put together. You've got a plan about how you're going to pitch it. You're going to do it, and it's probably going to flop. You should just expect that some portion of these are going to flop. You probably need a little bit of just exposure therapy to get comfortable with this. It really helps if there's someone else there, because you can now kind of play off of each other and bounce off of it and bounce back together. Right. Otherwise, it might just be pretty demoralizing. Yeah. But the really, really important thing here is that over time, you need to be improving your pitch. And the only way that happens is if you're paying really, really close attention to what's the investor's reaction as you're talking about things. Because if you just come in, you deliver your pitch, and then you leave, and then they say no, and you don't learn anything, then you're going to have a really, really rough several months. Right. But if you can track where their eyes light up in response to the things you're saying, you can lock those pieces in, and then you can shift the ones that didn't work and see where they dropped off and figure out and troubleshoot how do you get your pitch to a place where they're actually excited, because it won't be there when you first start.
Right. Looming it, looking at it later.
Yeah.
Or really, as Ari said, doing it with your co-founder.
Yeah.
And then, both of you are on Slack probably at the same time talking. You're reviewing it after this. What matters is the learning and iterating and getting closer, right? And if you can do that yourself, great. But you often need to either watch tape or have somebody else who's able to help you, see things that you haven't been able to. So.
And I think you have to almost enjoy that.
Yeah. Right.
You have to find the game in this. I think one of the reasons that we're so good at pitching is we both like perfecting that narrative, right? We were just going back and forth for 5 minutes on exactly how should we do this one sentence here. And it's
right.
You have to enjoy trying to create a mental model of what they're thinking about in the theory of mind almost in what's going to land for them.
Right.
And if you can do that, then you get this satisfaction out of them responding, right? It's this the kind of this visceral social thing of like, they're getting excited and you get excited because they're getting excited, and kind of everyone gets hyped up together. Like this is something you're really amazing at, is like giving this energy that they feed off of and tracking whether or not they're getting that energy. And if you can figure out how do you turn this into a game where you're tracking this, you're going to have a way better time than if you're just in there. Like, I can come out of a meeting where everything flopped and actually be excited because I know what I need to do better next time. Whereas if you come out of that meeting demoralized because nothing happened, then you're just going to go into this downward spiral. But it's going to be hundreds of no's, right? And so you need to be tracking you need leading indicators, right? You can't just be tracking, did someone invest? You need to be tracking, am I getting better?
Yeah, that's for sure.
That's way easier to track.
Yeah. It's not so different than, I think, like what people are doing when they craft really good writing, or like really listening to somebody actually, like in therapy or something, where like, one example that I can say that I've said here is like, I'm talking about why we shifted from going B2C to B2B initially. And one simple way to describe it is just like, nobody wakes up in the morning and is like, how do I get $50 away? Like it's not a deep, that immediately you understand that it's not a deep need. Like, that you've never woken up thinking, oh, I need to donate $50 this second, right? Like, and little, like you start to learn little phrases like this, and there's tons, like,
and that's a good one, right? Because it's like, why have we said that phrase 3 times, right? It's like, well, like, we know that when I say that to someone, and when you say that to someone, they get it. Yeah. They're like, oh, yeah, no one does wake up. Yeah. They're like, yeah, you're right, I guess. And it's like, suddenly they get the pivot and they're totally on board because they're like, oh yeah, the charities do wake up in the morning trying to get $50 in. Right. And you have to be like looking for that moment of reaction of like, oh, right, when something clicked for them. And then like when it clicked, like, we'll reuse that phrase 1,000 times over the course of a few months.
That's right. And like, I think it's maybe tied to this one analogy that like, one of our advisors, Jenny, and then really her partner, Max Ventilla, has given us, and Max has raised like maybe $150 million over his career and started off school and is like very good at this particular thing. And his analogy is something like, there are these gates that you need to pass through with each investor, just like you need to be above the bar on certain things. Like, they need to know, okay, I trust your team, right? Or they need to know, like some of the things Ari was saying earlier around, you're going to be the kinds of people that will sort this out. And so once you learn what are the like phrases and not like what are the things about us that are true that resonate with them that make them feel this way, you just package it well and say it to them, right? And you start to see them do this. And so and that's true for each gate, whether it's on product or on like, where you're at in the round or anything else. So paying attention to them is like so valuable, actually.
And I think it's also not just framing. Like, I think we go deeper. Like, you need to be really willing to substantially shift what you think about your company.
Oh, yeah.
And like, not be too deeply invested in your current answers coming in about all this stuff. And like, maybe you have the answers to like what your business model is going to be, or maybe you don't. But like, if you start talking to people about something and it doesn't land, it's not just change the wording. It's like rethink the thing, right? So it's like,
that's right.
When we did the first pitches, I remember like people being like, oh, like what's your go-to-market strategy going to be? And we're like, guess we need a go-to-market strategy. Right, okay. All right. So then we like go off and we come up with a go-to-market strategy, right? Like, and then like the next time we come into a pitch and someone's like, what's your go-to-market strategy going to be? We're like, well, we're going to run a bunch of paid ads. That's how we're going to get donors. And they're like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like relying exclusively on paid acquisition isn't really going to work out in the long run. We're like, guess not. So then, all right. Well, the next pitch you come in, you're like, look, we're going to do a combination of both paid acquisition and also working with charities who are going to promote it because they really want to get new donors. And they're like, aren't charities really slow to move though? That seems like a bad one. You're like, yeah, you're right. And so the next one you come in, we're going to do a combination of paid ads and we're going to do a bunch of viral user-led growth because people want to look good to their friends. You're like, oh, user-led growth is really great because now that can be viral. That's really clever. And you're like, yeah, that was always our plan. Right? Like, no, of course not. But 13 pitches later, you've got some of the best minds in the world when it comes to startups here telling you why your idea sucks. Right. Listen to them. They know some stuff. It's not just a question of, can you trick them into thinking this is a good idea? It's a question of, can you actually come up with a better idea from this? And if you're really genuinely open to that, you'll both do better at pitching and also have a better startup at the end of it.
I could tell you the specifics on each deck, right? Like when we would mention the team and we'd be like, okay, you notice when you say Ivan has managed 20 engineers before, more importantly, Ivan's been through YC. Right? She's like, okay, he knows what's going on here, right? Like you have somebody who's done this before. Right? It's like a gate. I think certainly there was one as we iterated and learned more where we would say like the first version pre-seed, we were like, we've run this survey on, people's interest in it and whether they'd even leave an email, and that's real behavior. And so it reflected that we like understood a funnel and we were like actually trying to get as far down it as possible, even though we didn't have traction. Like we had what you would think would be as much traction as you could, and that we were thinking about it thoughtfully. Yeah. And so I remember showing people like this study, right, or whatever, and they were like, oh, okay, great, like you on to the next thing. And you could see just the like comfort.
Right, like it's kind of like the 13 different slides we're going through are like each
they are honed to be
a
gate
that you need to pass. And so like every single one of those things you need to be iterating until they feel like really comfortable on that one.
Right.
And like the one that you'll probably iterate the most on is really just on like the problem and the solution. And like you'll do most of that iteration again, like in actual substance of figuring out your startup.
Right.
But even and just the framing of it. I think we were talking some of this before about like, do you call it infrastructure? Do you call it donation pages? Right. We were talking about other iterations like this around like the amount you raise. Like, do you tell them 250 or 100,000 or 500,000, right? And all of those are because they're responding when you tell them a thing, and you should shift what you're doing in response to that. But yeah, I think like around the problem statements are probably when we've done the most iteration. Like when we were raising the first round, we spent tons of time thinking about like, is the problem that we're solving that people don't know where to give? Or is the problem that we're solving that people like want to feel like a good person?
Right.
Is the problem that we're solving that people are like getting caught up in the process and can't stop all the way? And you can like iterate through those and see how do people react, right? Yeah. People reacted really, really well when we started talking about that, like, oh, you like have all of this money offline and it's shifting online.
Right.
And the question is like, what makes them feel like, oh, yeah, that is a problem? Honestly, this narrative iteration is something we take to all parts of the startup, right? Yeah. So it's like, it's how we do hiring, it's how we do sales, it's how we do fundraising. Like, so most recently, like, for example, one line that stands out to me that I've said a million times before is like, we're working on the mobile app, we were like struggling to get in users, we like had a bunch of, press come in and all these different things. And instead we started getting like charities coming in inbound asking us, could they use our mobile app, right? And then we pivoted, and a week later we had 10,000 people on the mobile app. I know when I say that line, everyone goes, oh, wow, okay, you made a really good choice, right? And like, I can tell because I've tried 30 different things when I've tried to explain why we did the pivot story. I know that's the one that lands where people make the conclusion, you made the right decision because you had 10,000 users a week later. I can tell you, we tried 30 other things before I said that sentence. And then people are like, I don't know, maybe you're wasting your time. Maybe you should go back to that thing, right? And so it's like, it's in conversations with friends when you're telling them what you work on for your startup. It's when you're talking to charities about this software that you're selling them and you're thinking about like, well, do they react more when I talk about it as a way to integrate all of your data, or do they react more when I talk about it as a way to get a better relationship with your donors, right? And it's all about just seeing how people react to the things you're saying and what's really tapping into their psychological needs.
Yeah. I have one that I have to raise though.
Yeah.
Which is like, it reflects kind of what Ari's saying about it being really important to us across all the domains it is. And it's like just basically saying it's important to us that we really listen to people and hear what their needs are and then try to like solve them and in ways that they understand. But this was like a famous one throughout the company actually, because it was like such a debate initially and it's amazing. And now I have totally flipped in saying it, but at some point Ari said to an org or a development director, like, what we're doing here and like helping you like draft emails and figure out what to do and handling all this stuff for you, right, is that we're going to handle the like $5 an hour tasks and you can do the like $500 an hour tasks or something. Like, you need to talk to the major donor, but we can handle all of this. And I was like, I don't know about that one. And you can see everybody understand it right away. Like if you say this to a executive director or development director of a nonprofit, they will just like start nodding with you or whatever, right? Because it is so resonant with their life. And
well,
so,
what really clinched it is you can tell when someone really loves it when they start saying the lines back to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So it's like, it's like 10 minutes later in your conversation with them, they're like, well, it's like you said, like, it's just going to help me stop spending time on the $5 an hour tasks.
Right.
And like when enough people start saying lines back to you, you can tell which ones really stuck with them.
Right.
This is, as it happens, also the biggest mistake people make when they're pitching. So I've watched a lot of people pitch their startups, and by far the biggest mistake is they just start talking at a million miles a minute, and like 4 minutes in, I still have no idea what their startup does. And they're like, oh, well, I said that in the first sentence, and then I immediately moved on to like the exact nuances of X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, great. I was still trying to figure out like, are you manufacturing cameras or are you a makeup company? And like, because you whizzed past that into like the exact details of how your makeup was manufactured, like not in Cambodia, I like cannot possibly track it. And so the really really key thing here is you get roughly one thought every 30 seconds. Like that's the speed at which people are updating. And so you need to fill the rest of those 30 seconds with fluff and say the thing like 4 more times because honestly like people space out. Like you can't expect them to read or hear the one thing you say and have that be the most important thing and then like oops, I got hungry and I was thinking about the fact that I haven't had lunch today. Like no one is interested in the conversation as you are and they're listening to probably 70% of what you say if you're lucky and they're not understanding half of it. You also have to watch out for jargon, right? Like you're coming deep inside of an area and you know every single word and you can't even begin to imagine that with like what someone doesn't know what like the warm glow of giving is because like everyone who thinks about donation psychology at all knows what warm glow is. They don't think about donation psychology. They're thinking about crypto and cameras and scooters. And so you need to say like the happy feelings you get when someone donates, not the warm glow. And that's so key to use super simple language, really, really slowly, reiterate the same thing over and over, and space it out so that you're only communicating that simple one thought every 30 seconds or once a slide, right?